as you can probably tell, I grew up in England, and my parents educated me in the church. I was Episcopalian, and it never really took, I'm afraid. I was skeptical right from the beginning. I did have a period where I tried to do my best to live up to it, but it didn't last very long. However, the religious education that I got taught me to respect the people who have a religion, and I'm still interested in the topics. I'm not indifferent to them. However, I'm here to represent the atheist side. So I should say right off the bat that I don't believe there is a Judeo-Christian God. Now, this doesn't mean that I think it's impossible. Perhaps I will die and have a nasty surprise. But I just can't see it in the world about me. When I try to make an honest attempt to decide what the truth of these matters is, it looks to me like there is no God of the kind Judeo-Christian tradition claims. Now, the principal reason why I have a problem believing in this is that the world contains, it seems to me, just too much suffering. St. Augustine distinguished between the evil that men do and the evil that men suffer. And it's the evil that people suffer that bothers me. I think that a loving God should try to stop it. I think that he would want to stop it if he loves us. And since he's all-powerful, I think that he would stop it. This isn't a terribly original reason for having a problem with Christianity. It's really familiar, and I'm sure that a great many people with an honest and deeply felt Christian view of matters are worried about it themselves. But that's the most important reason that I don't believe in the existence of God. And one of the things that worries me particularly is that the suffering doesn't seem to have any point. It's mostly random. And even though we might perhaps learn something from the suffering of others, a great many people and animals that suffer can't learn anything from it. And even if we could learn something from suffering, it seems to me we could learn that perhaps another way. I don't understand why God chooses this way to teach us these lessons. I'm also worried about whether the lessons are actually worth the cost of teaching them, which is very high indeed. The other reason I find the belief in God difficult is a little harder to put my finger on, but it's because the physical world seems to me to be indifferent to us and indifferent to conscious creatures at all. God is hidden. The natural world doesn't seem to me to reveal him. One can understand it perfectly well and predict it perfectly accurately without believing in God. And I don't understand why God would be hidden. If there was a God, I don't know why he wouldn't reveal himself to us. Now, the obvious answer to that is that God has revealed himself to us in that he's left us a religious text, the Bible, and that if I would just read it, I would know what God's nature was. Well, my worry about this is as follows. There are reasoning processes that work well, like observing things around you and finding out what hypotheses are confirmed by the observations you make, or mathematical and logical reasoning. And I find both these processes of reasoning intuitively very, very compelling. I have come to believe things that I didn't want to believe because they persuaded me. God's communication to us, if he existed, is through this book, which doesn't, God's existence doesn't follow, it seems to me, from the natural world or by logic or mathematics. So I'm worried that the Bible just doesn't carry conviction in the way that other ways of finding things out do carry conviction. And of course, I'm also worried, as you've probably anticipated, by the fact that the Bible is not the only religious text in existence. There are a great many others. And these texts contradict each other. They contradict each other, it seems to me, even when you read them not as literally true, but as poetry. They present different ways of life. They're different guides to living. Now, many people who do have a religion have had some kind of experience which they say is self-affirming, that once you've had this experience, you must see it as the experience of God. I've never had an experience like that, but I respect people who have, and that's one of the reasons why I feel that Christians are a bit put upon by atheists in general. When I was a young man, which is many, many years ago, I was particularly aggressive about pestering Christians about their views and pointing out how ridiculous it all was in no uncertain terms. And my friend used to call me an evangelical atheist. But over time, because I suppose of the behavior of religious people around me, and perhaps just because I became middle-aged, I came more to respect the views of people who are religious. And I'm sorry that atheism currently has the reputation it has of being so belligerent. After all, we want the various religions to live in some kind of harmony. And so I think it's up to atheists to do as best they can to be tolerant of people who've had these experiences, which I have not had. If you believe in God, and if you're a Roman Catholic, there's a doctrine that fits my position quite well. The Catholic Church believes you are not saved by your own efforts, but you're saved by the grace of God. That God picks certain people to save. And he doesn't seem to have picked me. If you're a religious person, you'll say that. Now, one of the questions that was raised in this meeting is, what do you think about Jesus? Well, I believe Jesus was a real human being. I think that's most likely, because all of these texts arise at about the same time. Some of them are the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but there are other texts also, the unconventional texts that arise at about this time, and they all have this single person saying roughly the same thing. So it's most unlikely that there wasn't a real person to cause all that to happen. So I think Jesus existed, but Jesus was a human being like you and me, a human like us. I do believe Jesus delivered a compelling message, and since I read them as a child, I've always been impressed by the words of Jesus in the New Testament concerning the way one ought to live life. And certainly I admire very much the Christians in South Carolina who went so far as to forgive Dylan Roof after he had murdered so many of them. I feel that that was a great thing to do, and probably changed for the better a great deal in the United States of America, and indeed and beyond too. So I'm very fond of the Beatitudes, and I'm glad we should forgive our enemies, and I think Jesus presented a very clear and attractive moral philosophy, one most of which I agree with. Well, I'm nearly at the end, so I thought I would say some awful things about human life. I believe we're all animals. I believe we're really a species of chimpanzee, and that really we are, what I am and what you are, is chemical reactions of various sorts. And when I die, these reactions will stop, and I will have no consciousness. Now, you might find that a rather bleak view of life, but I don't, and I'd like to point out that it's quite well supported. There's a lot of evidence for it. And one of the reasons I don't find it a bleak view of life is because if we are really that kind of thing, then the good things we do look a great deal more admirable. If we are, what is man that thou art mindful of him? Thou hast made him a little lower than the angels and cast, I can't remember the exact quotation. But if you think of humans like that and you look around at the humans about you, they look like they're truly awful creatures, not living up to being cast a little lower than the angels at all. But if you think of us as animals, it's really quite striking how generous we can be to one another and how much we cooperate with each other. Okay, that's my case.
First off, I just want to reiterate a point that our MC made, that like it's awesome that this is happening. I mean, look, it's like a Thursday night. You guys could be watching the American Idol finale, doing any number of things. Instead, we got such a big group of people who want to get together to do public philosophy about a really important question. It's like a foundation for human concern across time and the world. So like that's just so amazing and inspiring for me as a philosopher. And I'm super excited to be here at Mount Holyoke. I thought in my opening remarks, I would tell you a little bit about how I came to be Catholic and 3 big worries that I've struggled with about whether or not my faith is rationally justifiable and how I've started to overcome those worries. And I'm imagining for some of you guys, I'll just be giving you like fuel for the fire, because you'll think like, I didn't even present the worry strongly enough, and you'll have a way better way of stating the worry during Q&A, and then we can have a more full discussion about it. But just to kind of let you know where I'm coming from. So I'm a philosophy professor. I have always been hyper-rational and a hyper-planner. I have this app on my phone called Todoist. I don't know if any of you guys use this, but it's like this really hyper-sensitive to-do list. And I checked it a couple days ago before I went on this trip. I'd already crossed 11,200 things off my to-do list on this app since July when I started using it, which gives you a sense of like how focused and how big of a planner I am. And I was like this even when I was in high school. I was one of those like, you know, Tracy Flick kind of kids that has this really long list of what I'm going to do every year and how I'm going to succeed in life. I grew up in North Carolina in a pretty irreligious family. North Carolina, where are you from? Fayetteville. Fayetteville, awesome. I'm from Greensboro, so a little bit further west, but North Carolina pride. So this is kind of weird. I don't know what your experience was, but like I grew up in the Bible Belt, but knew like really nothing about religion. We were kind of an irreligious family. We weren't like active atheist family, but we'd kind of make fun of the people down the street that went to church a lot, and then mostly we just didn't talk about it. But if you'd asked me in high school if I ever saw myself becoming religious, I would say, of course not. Like that seems really embarrassing. That's definitely not on my master list. I was really interested in debate. I imagined myself going to college, becoming an attorney, and really saw like that being my future. So fast forward to starting college. My first year of college was September of 2001. Obviously, a huge world event happened then, the World Trade Center attacks. And when that first happened, I remember for me, it was like it was happening in another country. I mean, I hadn't really gotten out of North Carolina very much. It's like I didn't know anybody that lived in Manhattan. I had never been to Manhattan or Washington, D.C. I just, it seemed like it was happening really far away, but I could tell like something monumental was happening. Something big was happening inside of me that first year in college. Like, I don't know if you guys have had this experience at Mount Holyoke, but for the first time I was away from my family. I was starting to realize that all of the plans I had as a high school senior started to look kind of stupid or meaningless or not exactly what I really wanted to keep doing. I also started to get into philosophy, started asking big questions like, what is it to be a good person? What is it to have a meaningful life? And I kept thinking about the World Trade Center, like more and more. I think what really got to me in retrospect was I imagined myself being one of those people who went to work that day and died. Like, I think if you'd asked me in high school what would be the most awesome adult life to have, it would be like to be a really high-paid lawyer in Manhattan with a really successful career and a really great family. That's all I wanted for myself. I started to identify strongly with those people and then thought, man, they just like died for really stupid reasons. Like, and this can just happen. This just happens in the world all the time. And remember, I'm a philosophy major, so I'm reading like Nietzsche and stuff in my dorm room, and I'm getting really nervous about this. Fast forward to my second year of college, anniversary of the September 11th attacks. That's when I started going to church. And what happened, it was the real anniversary of the attacks, so it was a Wednesday. I was reading a story in the New York Times. I hope you guys all read the newspaper daily. That's like one of the most important things you can do as a college student. I was in that habit, and I was reading the Times, and they had a piece about children whose parents had died in the World Trade Center. And that just like put a really fine point on a bunch of stuff that I just couldn't stop thinking about and worrying about. It's like, man, it's such a horrible thing that like these kids just lost their parents for these really stupid reasons. I want somebody to talk with me about this. Like, this is something that's just really bothering me. Philosophy is not really helping me answer these questions. So the first thing I did was I called my mom. I always talk to my parents on Sunday. Wednesday's not an official like call day between us. So I call my mom at work. It's a Wednesday. I'm like, I'm thinking about the World Trade Center attacks, and it's making me really sad, and also asking, causing me to ask all these questions about what life means. And my mom is like, are you okay? Like, do you need to go to the counseling center? Do you want me to put your dad on the phone? And I'm like, no, I'm not fine. I'm not depressed or anything. I'm just thinking about all these questions, and I wanted to talk with you about it. And she's like, well, I'm at work. The timing is not so great, and this is kind of strange. Maybe it's something we could talk about over the weekend. It's like, okay. So I get off, I love you, click, get off the phone. Think like, well, that was great. I love talking to my mom, but that wasn't what I was looking for. Who gives meaningful speeches about complicated, difficult world events? Church people. I'm sure there's like some church person today that's going to be providing meaning or perspective on this thing that's really bothering me. So it's like, I'll go find some church service to go to. And there had been a Catholic church that was near my dorm, and I'd always kind of passed by it and wondered what went on there and been increasingly curious about it. Looked it up. They had a daily mass that afternoon. I was like, I'll go check it out. I'm sure they're going to be talking about September 11th because it's the one-year anniversary. It's going to be great. Now, I don't know, are there any Catholics in the audience? You can realize how stupid I was because that's not at all what happens in daily mass. I go to this service, and it's me, a priest, 3 old ladies, maybe 4. There's a bunch of readings that were chosen like long before the September 11th attacks happened. A homily that had nothing to do with September 11th, and then Holy Communion, and then we left. There was a lot of standing and sitting and reciting things that I didn't know. And I remember sitting there and at the end of it thinking like, wow, that was not what I was expecting at all. But something really great is here. Like something nice is here, something that I have been looking for is here, and it felt really great to be here. I started going back, just like quietly, like going to daily masses sometimes every couple of weeks. Started going on Sundays. You can see like the story of like an addict getting hooked. Started getting more and more interested in this. And at every step of the way felt like, okay, this is really surprising, but I have these questions that are being met in this place, and they're not really being met in other parts of my life. If you decide to become Catholic as an adult, you do this year-long course. We're very academic about it, called RCIA, which introduced me to kind of the basic tenets of the Christian faith and beliefs about the Christian faith, how to read the Bible. I learned to say those prayers that I didn't know before. And at each step of the way, I was thinking, like, this is really right, and this is really helping me make sense of some things that I'm having a hard time making sense of. Now, at the same time, I'm becoming a philosophy major, and like a really hardcore former debater philosophy major. So the kind of person, like, in class, I was the jerk in class that was trying to, like, take apart your argument. And started thinking like, oh, crap, like what happens if the other people in my major figure out that I'm doing this whole Catholic thing? Like, I do not have answers for basic questions in Christian apologetics. The apologetics wasn't even like the part of RCIA I really enjoyed. I started thinking, too, maybe I'm just like really irrational in this part of my life because I don't have good arguments to support what I say. I don't have good answers to people when they question me about it. And as my friends and family started to figure out what I was doing along the way, they all thought it was pretty weird, going from like pretty hardcore atheist high school student to like pretty serious Catholic who's like wearing a Mary medal. So I worried about this for a long time, not just after college graduation, but into graduate school. I really just tried to keep my philosophical and religious lives separate. But as I've gone on, I've started to think a lot of my worries that I'm being irrational, maybe they are answerable. So I wanted to put some of those on the table. Maybe some of you guys share these worries. Maybe you guys have much more serious worries that you want to present to me. But here are a couple things at least I've personally worried about that I think, like, man, my faith really must be irrational. And then as I've thought more about them, I was like, these aren't actually the best philosophical arguments against rational Christian faith. So one argument, and one that I heard a lot, especially when I was joining the church, was you only believe that for really chancy contingent reasons. So like, look, if my dorm had been further away from the Catholic Church, or if there hadn't been any churches in my community, or if it had been raining really hard that day, or if I had been born in a different culture or grew up in an area where Christianity wasn't present, I wouldn't be Christian. I wouldn't believe any of these things that I currently believe. So that's a good reason to think that my belief is unjustified. And I hear that a lot, and that used to really keep me up at night. I was like, yeah, man, this story does from the outside seem really chancy. Then I thought more about it, and a lot of our beliefs are really chancy. The way we came about getting them turns out to be in a way that's really contingent. If things had gone slightly differently, we wouldn't have had those beliefs. I've got some examples I could talk about, but because we're kind of short on time, I won't do that. I started to think, like, if that was true, if chancy beliefs are automatically ruled out, then a lot of my beliefs that are perfectly justified are going to get ruled out. So that can't be a good argument. Another argument is the way you come to have religious beliefs is super weird in a way that makes them unjustified compared with, like, normal beliefs. And that one also kept me up a lot at night, because like a lot of people who've come to religious faith, if you ask me how it worked, I can tell you the events that were happening in my life at that time, and I can appeal to, like, the working of the Holy Spirit, but the story starts to sound weird at a certain point. I think it's gone that way for a lot of religious people. But the more I thought about it, the more I think, you know, the things that serve as my reasons for being Catholic, the fact that I trust the Bible, the fact that I read these texts from the tradition and I think they're making really good and interesting arguments, the fact that I introspect and I find meaning and I find, like, value in the teachings of this faith, the fact that I trust the people that tell me about it, the fact that as a total theory of the world, it's really working for me and helping me to explain a lot of things. Those are all ways that I come to other kinds of beliefs, not just religious beliefs, and they're normal, somewhat respectable ways of developing your belief systems. So it can't just be, like, automatically that religious faith has to be formed in a really weird way, because there are also lots of normal ways that I go about getting evidence for my faith that are perfectly respectable ways to find reasons. A third issue, and this comes up the most with my Notre Dame students for some reason, is people will come up to me and say, your faith is irrational because by definition, religious faith is irrational. It's just what it is to have faith is to have beliefs that are immune from evidence. You see philosophers writing this, actually, in, like, texts in philosophy of religion. They'll just define faith as belief that's immune from reasons or a belief that's not responsive to evidence. And I have never bought that. I know that's an important view of faith for many traditions, and we can have a really interesting discussion about that tonight. But I don't think it's any part of religious faith that you turn off your reason-sensing device. I think we, by nature, are wired to always look for reasons and evidence, be it in questions about religion or questions about science or just ordinary questions about, like, which detergent we should buy. We're always looking for reasons and evidence. Some topics, it's harder to find those reasons than others, and religion is one of the really big topics where it's hard to detect our reasons because the thing that we're going after is a really difficult question. What do our lives mean? Is there a God? What is he like? Those are the kinds of things where the evidence turns out to be particularly tricky and not easy, but it doesn't mean that it's not there. And I think there's a really good case to be made that in the Christian tradition, everybody from Christ to the disciples have always been looking for extra reasons for their beliefs and have been kind of updating their view of the faith in response to new reasons. I think that's a vibrant part of the tradition. So I don't buy that argument. Now, the thing that really keeps me up at night, and this is the one that Sam brought up, is the problem of evil. And this is the one, I mean, I still, like, maybe once or twice a year will wake up in a cold sweat thinking about the problem of evil and just like, man, this is devastating. Like, it's just a proof that there's no God and you can't rationally believe something that's been proven to be false. I'm enough of a philosopher to buy that. And the way I've kind of dealt with the problem of evil, or at least tried to figure out why I find it so worrying, but why the worries don't stop me from being Catholic, is it seems worrying because the argument from evil, the argument from suffering, you can state it in like 2 minutes. I mean, it is one of the best like knockdown philosophical discoveries in the history of doing philosophy. It's a really simple two-premise argument, proves something really profound, has seemingly good logic, seems really plausible. All the answers to the problem of evil are really hard to get out. Like it's a bad thing to get stuck on the side of defending theism in a debate on the problem of evil if the debate's going to end by 8:30. Because when you want to start explaining all of your theory about why God might allow suffering, you have to get into some really heavy details. And it might turn out at the end of the day, your answer looks a lot less dialectically strong as the person who stated the problem to begin with. And I've always felt this way about the problem of evil. I hate philosophers who think that they can give a really quick answer for why a God of the Christian or Muslim or Jewish tradition would permit evil. I think it's something that's taken theologians thousands of years to try to wrestle with. And we have well-developed theories from within the tradition, but they're theories that, one, are not going to be particularly rationally persuasive for people who aren't already in the tradition, and two, are just resist succinct statements. So you might think, that's a total cop-out. She said it was a really great argument, and then she refused to give me the answer to it. Fair enough. What I will issue is a promissory note. I think it's the kind of thing that we can talk about. It does raise the issue of what theists owe the public or atheists or people that are debating with them when the problem is posed, and I think that's a really tricky question. But I do think it's the kind of philosophical problem, one of these philosophical problems, that resists a really easy and tidy solution, but a big, messy, complicated solution is available for people that are really worried about it. And that's how I've been dealing with the problem. So those are just a couple of worries, and again, how I've tried to work through them in my own faith. But again, I think you guys probably have some more, and I know that we can have some really interesting dialogue about a lot of questions where theists and atheists either agree or disagree. And so I really want to get to that portion of the evening. So I'm going to put down the mic, but also just say, like, thanks. I am super glad that we're doing this. I know I'm going to learn a lot from you guys and from Sam. So appreciate it.
Thanks a lot to both of you. So before we turn over to the audience, there's a couple of twinned questions that your talks actually engendered for me. And what was fascinating is sort of seeing the sort of parallel thing. So I guess we can start with the question with you, Sam, and there's a parallel one for you. But Sam, in your description of our lives, we're these animals. We're sort of these glorified animal type things. And I guess I'm wondering, do we have a purpose? Do humans have a purpose beyond survival and reproduction? And if we don't, right, which if we really are animals, we are here to survive and reproduce, and that's nothing else. If we don't have any, why do we feel like we should or do have a purpose? I mean, where did that come from? There doesn't seem to be any advantage to thinking we have a purpose if our real purpose is just to have as many children as possible.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both. I'll just say what I think. I have a rather personal story, but I'll tell it anyway. When I was a young man, I looked at the evidence and I decided that none of the arguments for humans' life having a purpose were any good at all. And I came to the conclusion that I didn't believe our life had any purpose. So I was actually reasonably content with this and continued to work on my bachelor's degree and then furthermore on my master's and PhD. Well, finally I got a job here, and eventually the college was rash enough to give me tenure. Well, now after you get tenure, it's very hard to fire you, except for gross moral turpitude, which nobody knows what it is. So I thought, well, now I don't have to do any work. I can just do the things that I enjoy. And what I enjoyed at the time was getting drunk. So I would go home, do my enough work to avoid, total misery at this place, and go home and drink. And this went on for about a year and a half. And after about a year and a half, I just couldn't stand it anymore. It's just the question you were asking. I was like, this sucks. I thought I enjoyed getting drunk. I got drunk because it's a waste of your life, you'll think. Well, yeah, but to say that your life is a waste is to say that there's something which counts as not wasting your life, which means that there's something that counts as your life having a purpose, because you're supposed to not waste it. So I don't have a direct, I don't know why it is that we feel this thing that you say we feel. I just know that all the arguments indicate that we really ought not to be feeling it. We really ought to be getting drunk and having fun and having a good time. So I don't know why we feel it. I wouldn't say, I was going to say that I almost envy religious people the comfort that they have in their religious beliefs. But I'm not going to answer a question by saying that the answer is, it would be more comfortable for me to believe X than to believe not X, therefore I'll believe X, even if I were capable of believing X just by wanting to. So I tried to find something that was meaningful to me. I tried to find something outside of myself that I cared about. And there were lots of things like that. So mostly to do with other people and community and getting some work done and, you know, writing our book and all these tiresome things. So once I started doing that, the feeling that my life was meaningless went away. Sorry to take so long.
And I think the flip question for you, Megan, is it is the problem of pain question that and your answer was a cop-out. I think we can all agree. But I guess the question I would ask then is, why would the God that you're talking about have the pain argument out there? So he's creating this universe. There's this obvious pain. God is a loving God. There's pain. There's a real contradiction there. Why wouldn't he have a simpler answer to such an obvious problem?
So I was wondering which way you were going to go. If you're going to push me like, no, we want the full-blown theodicy.
No, I know what the full-blown theodicy.
Can you guys hear me? In which case, like, I'll run out the clock. But you're asking a question about, like, what I consider sometimes the problem of hiddenness. So this idea of if an all-loving, all-powerful God exists and having the right kinds of beliefs and right kinds of answers to questions about him is really important, then why doesn't he make it so much easier to have those beliefs and to have those answers? Which I think of that as a version of the problem of evil, because not knowing certain things is a kind of evil that we suffer. And it's an interesting puzzle. I have views on this that I don't know how closely they fit with like official Catholic doctrine. I should have prefaced all my remarks tonight with like, I consider myself a very serious Catholic, but I'm also a philosopher and have a kind of do-it-yourself mentality on some of these philosophical questions. So I'll tell you how I start to think about the problem of hiddenness, but again, opening it up to other theological approaches. I think I've always been intrigued by what are sometimes called soul-making answers to the problem of hiddenness. And the basic idea is, if God suddenly just dropped big truth bombs on us, like told us everything that was true about him, it would be so overwhelming that we wouldn't have any freedom anymore. Like we couldn't do anything except, you know, worship God in that scenario. And you might think like worshiping God's the best, so why wouldn't he do that? But as part of this view and part of my general way of approaching the problem of evil, that us freely choosing to have these relationships with God is a very great good that God is not willing to part with. And I think that that's got to be part of an answer to the problem of hiddenness. But I would even go a little bit further. Lately, I've been reading a lot of Augustine recently. And he has this kind of suggestive approach to the problem of hiddenness I think is worth developing more, which I call like a church-making solution to the problem of hiddenness. So the soul-making solution says, like, God doesn't give you all the information right away because he wants you to have a chance to freely choose things and develop your soul. But I also think God wants us to work together in the context of like communities debating questions of religion and trying to share information about religion and trying to come up with these theories on our own, because it also brings us together in community. And it's the kind of thing, one of the things we lost in the fall, one of the things that's really bad about our world right now is how much we don't trust and work with each other. And part of God not overwhelming us with information is he forces us to work together to try to figure out the best ways to worship him. And that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of good that hiddenness serves. Anytime you're wrestling with these problems, you're trying to think, well, what are some reasons we might come up with for why somebody like God would withhold this thing that we think would be really good? and then we float these reasons. We're never super confident in them because God is so weird and God's a complicated person to understand. But they might help us think like, okay, well, at least our theory is starting to develop some consistency. And I think that might be part of the story. Like it's good for God that we argue about the problem of evil because it brings us together and helps us develop our views.
That leads actually to the second twin, and I'll start with you because it leads so directly.
Yeah.
So Sam's other argument is that God is hidden from Sam. And so you've got the sort of hiddenness argument, it's good for the soul, it's good for the church, but surely it's not good for Sam that God is hidden from him. I mean, if we really believe that there was a God and there are eternal consequences to whether you believe this or not, why is God hidden from Sam?
I mean, I just met Sam, so something we'd probably have to sit down and talk a lot more about what's going on with Sam. But I have a suspicion that like part of the answer is going to be that you know God wants you to read and think more, doesn't want to force you to believe anything. He made you a philosopher, so in the first place, so he knew what he was getting into and knew that he wanted you to be able to think about these things for yourself without overwhelming you. But it's also, you know, it's not clear, I think, so much when we get to like really particular details of theodicy. And this is always a problem with the problem of evil. You can say like, why does God allow suffering generally, and start to come up with a theory. But then you can point to some particularly awful, pointless, really salient event, like, you know, a small child getting diagnosed with terminal cancer that you know, or a tsunami that happened in Indonesia, and you think like that event in its full, concrete, gory detail, how would God explain that? And you're focusing on all the details. That's a particularly hard version of the problem of evil to answer. One, because like you have all of the concrete details of having the particular case in front of you. But also, like, anything you say is likely to be offensive to people that are involved in that particular event. So, like, coming up with, like, if issuing a general free will response to the problem of hiddenness might be the kind of thing that we can have in polite company and debate like philosophers. But then I start, like, diagnosing what's going on in Sam's life. And even if my theory is justified, which it almost definitely is not, because I don't know that much about what's going on in his life, offering it seems like really inappropriate, or seems to get you in this phase of now you're starting to say things that that are not like consistent with your other commitments being in this tradition. So this is why I think those versions of the problem are particularly hard to answer, both philosophically but also dialectically, because they put the theist in this position of having to say stuff or make moves that are not cool.
So, and then the flip side, Sam, is, I mean, your basic argument for atheism is there doesn't seem to be any rational reason to believe in God. So we'll pause it. You've just met Meghan, too. But you know, why does somebody that is seemingly rational and seemingly intelligent, why would somebody believe in God if there is no compelling rational reason to believe in God? What explains belief?
Well, I find myself really in much the same position as Meghan was, in that it's, Meghan didn't say this about me, but she could have said, the reason why God is hidden from Sam is that Sam doesn't want to listen. Sam is just, you know, refusing to accept the kind of evidence that God has produced. And that may be right. I mean, sometimes we're all sort of inclined sometimes to overreact and not see things in as open-minded a way as would be correct. Now, your question was, you know, why does Meghan believe if belief is irrational? Well, I don't know, right? But the answer doesn't have to, I mean, the answer obviously doesn't have to be because God exists and makes Meghan believe. It might be, I'm sorry, Meghan, but this is going to be sort of insulting, but you know, it might be something complicated going on in Meghan. You know, she might have some certain beliefs and desires and needs and so on that are addressed by this and somehow overwhelm. Remember that I think that every one of us is like a machine, that we're not infallible in our reasoning processes. And so there's nothing bad about this because we all suffer from it. It might be simply that the circumstances overwhelm individuals and they believe in it. Some people have thought that the fact that people have had religious experiences is by itself a reason for believing in the existence of God. And they say things like, all these people have had religious experiences independently with no communication, and they've all turned out to be similar in a certain way. Well, you can see, I think, how I would respond to that. Monotheism is now worldwide. There's probably nobody in the world, well, that's too rash. There's hardly anybody in the world who hasn't heard of it. It may be that there are even evolutionary arguments that say our brains evolved in such a way as to make us perceive the world in such a way that might give rise to religious belief. So the answer is I don't know, but I don't think it has to be God that causes this.
So, and then I think that the answers you both gave to that last question in particular sort of raised this question in my mind. It's interesting, and this is, I think, the reason many people find discussing religion so hard. Is it gets really hard as soon as it starts getting personal at all, right? And everybody gets really, really nervous. It was very impolite of me to ask with the names attached, and I knew that. No, it wasn't impolite of me. But I think sort of it raises this question: like, you imagine you have people in a civil society, some of whom are devout believers who really do believe there is this God who has this really important message, and you need to believe this, or you're going to be damned eternally. And you have another set of people who think that that's just not true, that's just sort of these ridiculous claims, and they feel judged all the time. And you end up, and you're trying to form a civil society. And I guess I'm wondering, is it possible to create a civil society that we don't just sort of pretend these differences don't exist, but figure out a way to sort of make this work? And in particular, you can do the civil society, we all go through life and we eat in the same dining hall, but when you start getting to, okay, now we're going to have a government and we're going to start passing laws, and you have people with these strong religious beliefs and people without that, can we make this work, or is this just too big of a tension line and society needs to make a call on this? Either one of you can start.
Okay, I think I should start because I think Meghan has more to say on this. We've had a brief discussion prior to the meeting. I think it is possible, and I admit it might be difficult. It depends on the religion, but I don't know of any major monotheistic religion, even including Islam, that completely rejects other religions living in their society. It is true that some sects of Islam do, but Islam itself does not. So I believe we could develop a society rather like the societies that have been developed in the West. Of course, where religious people are tolerant of one another. Now, you might respond to that by saying, well, what about something like abortion, which some people feel for religious reasons is morally deeply wrong? Aren't they likely to insist that the law be made in such a way as to make abortion illegal? There are lots of other examples, the death penalty, for example. And my response to that is, I think many of the religious people that I know and the religions that I am acquainted with, they're more than just a set of dogmas. If they say that something is wrong, there's usually a reason for thinking it's wrong that's not just because God said it was wrong in Book 6, Chapter 3, verse 12. So in the case of the death penalty, there are lots of reasons the death penalty was wrong. You don't have to rely upon saying that it's there's a religious backing for this. Abortion is a much more difficult case, but there are perfectly good pro-life arguments that are not religious in nature.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic on this point, probably almost naively optimistic in an election year to say stuff like this. But I think I've always been a big fan of this strand of Kant and Rawls that says that in a democracy, we owe each other reasons for the policies that we adopt, and they need to be the kinds of reasons that could, in principle, be taken up by anybody that lives in the society, and not just particular members. which might seem on the outside, if you've got this real commitment to public reason, that religious arguments are going to be off the table. They're just not allowed in public discourse. If somebody says we should ban abortions because God prohibits abortions, and a serious portion of your population doesn't believe in God or doesn't believe in that God, then you're appealing to reasons that they couldn't accept, which would be violating this doctrine of public reason. But I don't think it's so obvious that that this, like, having a commitment to public reason means religion's never allowed in the public space. And that's because a lot of religious beliefs, just like Sam said, are not these simple dogmatic claims of like God says P, God says Q, God says R. A lot of religious faith, I sometimes in work call this like thick religious faith, it involves a really complicated set of claims and beliefs. Some of them are explicitly theological, but a lot of them are moral. Some of them are beliefs about metaphysics or beliefs about history. And for many of those beliefs, the reasons that you hold those beliefs might be publicly accessible reasons, the kinds of reasons that anybody could accept. Some of them might be really specific to your circumstances, like things that you feel like have been revealed to you in your faith. But a big chunk of that will satisfy the criteria of being publicly accessible and will be the kind of thing that you're completely allowed to bring up in public debates. And I think the moral dimensions of a lot of people's religious faith can, in principle, satisfies condition of being the kind of thing that like you can put out there and expect anybody, regardless of their background, to at least entertain it as a reason for thinking that this policy is good or bad. So I think once you move out to like a more sophisticated view of what it is to have religious beliefs that justify your claims in the public space, then we can still be kind of optimistic about our ability as a really pluralistic society to have reasonable debates about this. And I think, I'll just finish by saying, I think this is also really important, because if we misinterpret this idea, we think religion is never allowed to be entered into democratic discourse, then we end up really disrespecting large groups of people that have these really serious reasons and arguments that they want to share and they want to have a hearing. And part of living well in a pluralistic democracy is letting those arguments get a hearing and deciding if they're any good. And so I also think we shouldn't be so quick to classify reasons as being like religious or not religious. Instead, we should just look, is this the kind of thing that you're allowed to put out there?
So there are questions from the audience. There are 2 microphones here and here.
Or objections, like anything,
comments.
or thoughts.
I'm Kate. I'm a senior here at Mount Holyoke. I'm an economics major, and my dad's a priest in the Episcopal faith. So this is really interesting to me because I find myself questioning these sorts of things often. But I thought that you brought up a really interesting point, Megan, about things that are by chance, and eliminating those things eliminate a lot of our choices that we make, and how those are like eliminated, and like eliminating things that are by chance eliminates so much. And you brought up a point about detergent.
Yeah.
But what about advertising? Like the advertising that we see affects the detergent that we buy in a lot of sense. So like, I think that can apply to a religion in the same sense that like what Sam Mitchell was saying about, religion appealing to certain personal kind of problems that you have. Is religion created to appeal to those sort of, in that advertising sense? Is religion an advertisement?
Yeah, this is a great question. Will you remind me of your name?
Kate.
Kate. So Kate asked a really interesting question, and I've been thinking a lot about biases recently as part of this book project that has nothing to do with religion that I'm working on. So, I oftentimes turn the question on religion and say, like, is my particular religious trajectory just showing that I've got a certain kind of bias? And you do hear this kind of objection raised to religious beliefs sometimes. It was raised to me actually just on Tuesday when I was at Middlebury. You only believe that because you're afraid of dying, or because you can't make sense of these really complicated world events, and like religion, especially certain strains of Christianity, are specially manufactured to help like deal with these psychological problems or serve these needs. And so, like, you know, once you realize that, and this goes into some kinds of debunking arguments that you can also see in, like, Nietzsche and other atheistic arguments in the history of philosophy. Once you realize that this ideology has been specially formulated to help you relieve these really serious psychological worries, you should think, well, that means it's not likely to be true, or your belief is not truth tracking. And I can see why people have that worry, but it's not a worry that I've taken super seriously, because I think when somebody comes to me and they say, like, you just became Christian because you're worried about dying or because you're worried about the meaning of life, I say, yeah, that was part of it. I mean, it wasn't the whole part of it, but one of the things that does, like, attract me to my faith is that it helps me get some traction on these questions that really bother me. But it helps me get traction on these questions that really bother me because I think there's something true behind it, like, because it's good at answering those questions. It's not specially manufactured to just appeal to my biases, but it's the case that these aren't genuine biases. It's like, they're like real human questions that this religion is answering for me. And it only seems like it's a big worry if you've already assumed, maybe because of the argument from evil or because you're committed to a certain kind of thoroughgoing naturalism, that there definitely could be no God, and you're just trying to explain, like, why people still believe persistently despite the fact that there's evidence that there's no God. But I'm not in that camp, so I think it's perfectly fine to say, like, I believe because it serves these psychological needs, and, like, it's a good making feature of my faith.
It's a common pattern to say, well, you're only believing that because blah, 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 blah. It could be anything. We're all familiar, I think, with people who say, well, the reason why Dick Cheney has the views that he has about coal is that he's an oil man. He's a fossil fuel magnate. Well, Dick Cheney, I hate this sentence, but Dick Cheney might be right, even though he has this nefarious reason. One of the reasons he believes it is a nefarious reason. You can be right even though you're believing it for the wrong reason, or you can believe it both for the right reason and a wrong reason and still be right. I wish... I'm sorry the debate about religion sometimes gets cheapened by allegations that religious people are believing things for personal reasons. I think religious people could reasonably answer, well, people have died horrible martyrdom deaths. Was it really to their advantage that they believed these things so strongly? It doesn't look very convincing that way. And besides, there are lots of cheap ways of answering worries about what happens after death, for example, and we don't believe them. We could believe reincarnation, for example, but we don't find it comforting to think that we would be reincarnated because we don't believe it's true. This is a point Meghan was making, I think, that in order to be comforted, you have to believe this thing is true. So you can't, yeah. All right, I'm done.
Hi, how are you? My name's Jim, and I just want to thank you, first of all, for the very polite way in which you've addressed one another. You don't know me, I don't know you, but I do have some credentials on both sides of this debate, having done some time in Southwest on Kennedy. Engineering major for a while before I started majoring in kegs, and had separated myself a couple of times. I'm probably one of the few attorneys in Massachusetts that flunked out of school twice, okay? And while I'm not a master at chess, I was an expert. So one of my questions would be, why is it not that a rational person would believe in Christianity, first of all, rather than evolution? The second thing that I'd like to raise is that the church did not always believe that it was by grace you're saved through faith. Martin Luther brought that about, of course. He was in the Roman Catholic Church, and that's what started the Protestant Reformation when he nailed the theses on the Wittenberg door. So here's the thing. you eloquently did relate that Jesus Christ is a man, and he is. But those of us who, as I did years later, after being a Jacob Bronowski Ascent of Man Darwinist and Carl Sagan fan, by the way, who found himself in his living room asking Christ into my life, had to search into these things, tossed my law books aside, and took up this thing called the Bible, a mere text, I guess, to some, I found to be something different. It all comes, though, down to this person named Jesus in time and history. If you've never seen the movie Risen, I encourage you to go take a look at it. It's a wonderful movie. Or read The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. Or read Darwin's Black Box by Behe. Wonderful, interesting evidence. But here's this man who comes into time and has nothing that they can record against him. No negativity. No words that come out of his mouth that's recorded by all of his enemies could not in a law court prove anything against him. He's taken...
I hate to interrupt, but is there a question?
Here's the last question, right? Talking about rationality and things that, well, we just accept this because we have something internally odd. This is capturing as separating myth from truth. That in itself should have been searching for truth, because we're already presupposing that there's myth. On what side of this debate does the myth attribute itself to? Jesus was killed, the presumptive leader of this Christian movement, right? Killed. What drew those men back after he died to go back? Why and how would it have been rational for them to go back after their leader was slain?
Thank you.
It makes no sense. And he rose from that grave. Without that, nothing else matters.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know whether, I'm sorry, but I have to say it, you know, I don't know whether how accurate the Bible stories are. Of course, if you're a religious person, you have to believe the Bible stories. That's what it is to have well, I shouldn't put it that strongly, but I think that if you're a religious person, you will believe these. It's what it is to have a religious commitment, I think. So I would say that the Bible might or might not be wrong about the resurrection of Jesus. In that, if you look at, I'm sorry, I'm not being very articulate here. If you look at St. Mark's Gospel, which was the first Gospel we have, the resurrection, while it's in there, is not very strongly emphasized. It's emphasized in the other Gospels much more. Mark emphasizes much more the content of the teaching of Jesus. All right, I'm an atheist, but I have a suspicion that perhaps the stories of the resurrection arose after Jesus' death as a result of the fact that people were so inspired by his words and made up stories about him. I should just want to say one more thing. I don't think the Christian religion is in any way incompatible with belief in evolution. I think there's good evidence for evolution, and I think it would be rash to take the Bible absolutely literally in its description in Genesis. There are episodes where Jesus himself uses metaphors, where he says, for example, remove the log from your own eye so that you can remove the speck from your neighbor's eye. It's entirely possible that, that we have to interpret the Bible less than literally in some points. I don't see Christianity as at odds with evolution.
I want to pick up on a theme of your question, or in your question. It might be a little bit of a tangent, but it's something I was hoping we could talk about a little bit tonight, because it's a question that's been on my mind quite a bit recently, which is how much thinking about the stories in the Gospels can teach us about what it is to be rational or to be a truth seeker. And this is something, you know, I didn't have a clear answer to that. I probably still don't, but it's something that I feel like I'm getting a little bit more clear on. And that looking at the life and ministry of Christ and his disciples, we actually get a really profound and important picture of what it is to be a truth seeker that's really relevant outside of even Christianity. It's relevant to my life as a philosophy professor. So what's that vision? Like before, when I was early on in grad school and in my philosophy major, I thought that being rational meant you take the arguments, you line up the premises, you reduce them to their simplest form, and then you punch holes. You show where it's invalid, you show where premises are questionable. I teach my students this exact same skill in intro, and that's what it is to be rational, is to approach the world in that way. And I think being a critical thinker is part of what it is to be rational, but one of the things we get really profoundly in the Gospels is the view that it's not all of being rational. It's not all of searching for truth as being able to analyze and reduce things in this way. And we see this, in Jesus' ministry, because he gives people arguments and theories sometimes, but he also gives us parables. He also just gives us direct demonstrations instead of theories. He approaches really thorny, difficult questions in a wide variety of ways, many of which might seem suspicious to like an analytic philosopher, but in our real lived experience in dealing with really difficult questions turns out to be one of the best ways to discover the truth. Another thing that I think is really cool about the life and ministry of Jesus when we're trying to think of this question about what it is to be rational is what happens when he rose from the dead. And one of my favorite scenes from from Acts is at the very beginning, Jesus has ascended into heaven. The disciples are thinking, he said he was going to come back, and they draw the inference, which is presumably a very good inference, that he's going to come back right away. Because he came back, 3 days the last time, so presumably this is going to be another quick turnover. Simple induction on one case, but still induction. You think they were right to believe that, and they're outside, waiting, and eventually they got to come in because he's not coming back. And you might think if you have this view that like faith, religious faith, is a really static thing or not something that's responsive to reasons, then the disciples, because they had great faith, should still be standing out there. They should have like starved to death or been rained on or something. But they didn't. They realized, we are pointed towards the truth and we care about discovering the truth in this really difficult matter, but we've made wrong assumptions. We've drawn wrong inferences along the way, and it's okay to go back and like update our views. And in fact, that is exactly what they do. And the church is built on this process of updating our beliefs, but still believing that there's a big truth out there that we're pointed at. So I think like meditating on these portions of the Bible, for me as a philosopher, has given me, really great insight into this general question of what it is to be rational, what it is to be somebody that cares about the truth, in ways that reverberate even outside of these questions about whether the faith itself is rational.
Hi, my name is Adarike, and I had a question in regards to miracles. So when you read the Bible, you see that there are miracles performed over and over, and even in Jesus' ministry, he had that. And even today, in present world, we have places where miracles have been performed, and people have been healed, or different things have happened. And so my question for you is that, is there a possibility of miracles happening without a God? And does that mean that there are some humans who possess, like, supernatural powers, or their chemical reactions working better? So I'm just wondering what your explanation for that would be, or if at all. I mean, you might not believe in miracles, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm actually rather skeptical about miracles. If you think about it, I'm afraid this mostly comes from the philosopher David Hume, who wrote about miracles. He said, if you think about it, who's describing the miracles, and where are these miracles taking place? Now, they are naturally, in the nature of the thing, strange events. So you might think that somebody who thinks it's the right way to do things is to look at what happens all the time and generalize from that. Somebody like that is almost inevitably going to disbelieve in miracles, because by their very nature they are unusual things. So the reason I disbelieve in miracles is if I actually witnessed one, or if one were witnessed really under very carefully controlled conditions. I'm not saying that nothing could ever convince me that a miracle had taken place. And certainly there are some things I just don't understand that I know have taken place. But I would remind you of what I think Carl Sagan said, which was that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And I don't find the evidence to be strong enough to convince me in these cases. I think this is another case where it's a matter of religious faith to take these things. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with you if you believe them out of religious faith. It's just something that I don't have.
I think it's a fantastic question, and it's a tricky philosophical question because this is one of those issues where we got to be really clear about definitions. So what do you mean by miracle? Well, two definitions that suggest themselves in the tradition are miracles are violations of the laws of nature, or miracles are just God intervening in the world somehow. So if you ask me, does God still like intervene in the world? My answer is definitely yes. I mean, I'm a Catholic. I believe God's present in communion every time I attend Mass. So like I'm saddled with that view, and I'm happy to defend it. That doesn't necessarily mean that God is violating a law of nature every time he does that. It just means that he's present. You say, do I believe in like the higher definition of miracles, that God violates the laws of nature or has done so in history? Well, then this is where I like play my metaphysics cop-out card. In my real job, I'm actually not a philosopher of religion primarily. I mostly work in a branch of philosophy called metaphysics, which is like broad theories about the nature of reality. One of the really big debates in metaphysics is just what exactly is a law of nature and how immutable are they. And I have like a pretty, low-grade view of what laws of nature are, and I think there are lots of examples that have nothing to do with religion, but would count as like violating a law of nature, like showing a law of nature to have not been a law of nature or to be slightly different. So I think like I'm not super bothered by the idea of saying that laws of nature in this complicated sense that I believe we should define laws of nature and get violated. But I have some really good colleagues with a much stronger view of laws of nature, sometimes called the governing view, where if they're right that that's what laws of nature are, then maybe they shouldn't ever be violated, and it would be really bad if God did it. When we get to that phase, then I'm like, then I don't know. I gotta like work out my costs and benefits of my different theories and see which one I can finally live with. But I think like this debate about miracles can sound really sensational when it's first put forward. Like, are there miracles still being performed today? Imagine on like the title of National Enquirer while you're waiting in the grocery store. And like, that makes it sound like it's really sensational, but actually is a somewhat like really sophisticated philosophical debate going on behind the scenes of what are we meaning by these different claims. And depending on how we adjudicate those debates, it might seem more or less crazy to say something like that you believe in miracles.
Hi. Okay, so thank you both for coming, first off. I have sort of a long, complicated question, but it's sort of pertaining to the rise of the spiritual but not religious, particularly among our generation. That's a very popular thing, and I kind of identify in that group. And some things that I've found that really bother me or that I have difficulty with is just the fact of translation with particularly Christian biblical texts, the fact that it's been translated so many times. And so we're getting like a 4th, 5th upwards degree translation of something that was written considerably after Jesus himself passed away. And how do we deal with these as historical text and also as something to take on faith, or knowing that maybe this isn't accurate, this isn't what was written even. Like even if they wrote something that was very true, it's since gone through the ringer of translation, if you know that. And then going from there, another difficulty I think with a lot of young people is we're very spiritual. We're not all atheists, but we don't always see in organized religion something that is effective or actually doing the work of God. Either we find that in the Bible or through a different spiritual path, and then we look at just the church in general. There's so many different churches, and you can read these texts which have been translated so many ways. I mean, if you look up queer exegesis, you can find the very, very good arguments for the Bible, like not only not condemning, but supporting homosexuality. And there's so many convincing ways to read things and so many different interpretations. It's like, how can you commit to one? And then how can you look at things that the church has done politically, or like certain dogmas that trace back to creeds that were actually made to like assert political dominance rather than really a faith-based thing? And how do you reconcile that with like what you're looking for a pure faith? And then sort of as an umbrella for all that, how do you two both see doubt in your positions? Because this is all about doubt and not being sure. So, but you seem very sure, both of you. And So, I mean, where does that work in with those questions, if you could digest all that?
That's fantastic. What's your name?
I'm Kellyanne.
Kellyanne, these are 3 like really awesome questions. I'll take a stab and then I might not answer all of them. Sometimes I also forget the questions halfway through, so maybe you should get back up. But the first question is one I've been thinking a lot about as a philosopher of language actually recently, which is, there's one way of looking at how we get the scriptures now and how they've been translated throughout history, where there's this like humongous telephone game happening across history, across multiple languages, involving a lot of really different, highly fallible people. Like, why on earth would you think that the text that we get at the end of it could possibly preserve meaning? I mean, we know meaning shifts really easily, and there's lots of examples of this in philosophy of language. So how on earth could somebody be confident that a document that's this old and about a subject matter that's this hard to even get knowledge about in the first place could possibly be meaning preserving? I think that's a fabulous philosophical question. If there are any philosophy majors in the audience, this is a great thing to be working on. The answer that I've come to is also one of these kind of cop-out answers of like, if you're already Catholic, you can use the answer, or Christian, any kind of Christian could use the answer, but if you're not, then you're going to hate it, which is, we have a theory of the Holy Spirit and his ability to like work and inspire people throughout history in the faith. And he's able to do something that language normally doesn't allow us to do, which is to preserve the important parts of the content, even through all of our mistranslations and mistakes, which is something, we talk about miracles, that's got to be a miracle, because it's basically like, we know that language doesn't typically work this way, but we're thinking for this particular text, given how important it is, and given that God exists, that it's able to happen. But that's, that's a profoundly interesting question, and one, like, it's worth talking and thinking a lot more about, and it's not necessarily the most obvious answer. And the question of doubt, I think that's a super interesting question, and I'd be interested in hearing what other people in the audience think about this. I am definitely really skeptical of anybody who says they have a really strong kind of Orthodox Christian faith and is really confident in all of it, where confident means they like assign credence 1 to 37 claims, whatever, involving their faith. One, because anytime somebody thinks they're being like super confident about anything, my initial reaction is to be like questioning. I think that's part of being a philosopher, is like, that's crap. But also, like, for really difficult subject matters, like whether God exists and how we should live our lives and what gives our lives meaning, I think we should all approach those with a significant dose of humility, because these are very difficult questions where really well-meaning, well-situated people can clearly disagree. I do think, though, there's a temptation to go to the opposite extreme, and I see this happen with a lot of other philosophers who are Christians who I really respect, which is to say, you don't even really have to believe anything to have faith. You just have to like hope that things work out a certain way, or think that the evidence might turn out a certain way, but not have any kind of confidence in any parts of it. And I think it's a mistake to go that far and to say that like faith is completely divorced from having belief and trying to seek evidence, because I think for a lot of people, at least in these orthodox, complicated, real-world religious faiths, they do make demands on what you believe. It's not just good enough for you to live a certain kind of life, but you're motivated to live that life because you believe certain things about the world. So I think like, there's a temptation to avoid, to like think, we take doubt really seriously as a phenomenon in the life of faith, but it's the kind of thing that we're always trying to overcome. Like, we're always still looking for reasons, and we're not giving up on that search. I don't know if you had more thoughts on this.
I was interested in your question on doubt. I think if you're an atheist, you are not free from doubt. Somebody asked Bertrand Russell what would happen, what he would say to God if he died and found out that God really existed. And he said, well, you didn't give us enough evidence. That's what I would say to him. And I'm quite sympathetic with Russell here. I do allow it as a possibility. I can't rule it out. It's just that the ways of reasoning that I have found reliable always seem to me to present serious problems to believing in a Judeo-Christian God. And I would say much the same as Russell. It's like, why didn't you tell me?
Hi, my name is India. I'm a first year here at Mount Holyoke. And I kind of had I guess I was more interested in hearing what you guys had to say because it's always been something that I've been really curious about and haven't found the answer in my church. But I was sort of wondering, you kind of spoke to it, what are some of the things you consider compatible and incompatible as far as religion and evolution? Because I find things that I do believe are compatible, but then I find other things that I believe are not so compatible.
This is a topic. You're from North Carolina, right? Yeah, that's awesome. I remember you. This is a topic where I sometimes feel a bit out of my depth. Like, well, I'm always skeptical of people who don't know a lot about the theory of evolution or current like best biology of evolution that want to like hold forth to audiences like this about how that theory is or isn't compatible with certain theological views. Because I think there's a temptation to like make things too easy too soon, like say they're obviously incompatible or it's obviously fine. Evolution could go the exact way that our current best theory says it goes in biology, but we'll just have God at the very end of it and everything's okay. I don't think that answer, I don't think it's super easy. The church teaches that they are compatible. You have to get into the details of how it all works out, but there are some hard questions that evolution raises for the faith. One of them is exactly related to the problem of evil. So suppose you think God permits evil because he loves us and wants to respect our free will. Okay, there was tons of suffering in the period before we came on the scene evolutionarily that clearly had nothing to do with our free will because we didn't exist. There were no free wills to respect, but that God clearly permitted. That's a huge theological problem that our best theory of evolution raises that the theology is going to need to struggle with. So that's just to say, like, I think we should avoid like sanguine answers to this. I'm super optimistic that they are compatible, and I don't think part of thinking of your faith as something that's always reason-seeking is I don't think you should ever be asked to deny your very best evidence in science or in secular moral theory or in philosophy or any other discipline just as a matter of faith. I think faith, like real faith, doesn't ask that of you. God like provides you the reasons and it allows you to respect the real reasons that you have. So I'm optimistic that faith would be compatible with evolution, but I think we should avoid like, really quick, succinct solutions to how they're compatible because one, our best theory is still being worked out by biologists, and two, it raises some tough questions. It's not the case that it's going to be like a super easy merger for us to enact.
Yeah, that's right. Evolution does present certain challenges to religious belief. My own view is that the religion can survive these challenges, and I'm kind of annoyed when people say, oh, well, evolution just shows that all this debate about God is ridiculous. I sympathize with what you said. You can't give glib answers. However, I'm going to give a couple of possible glib answers you could give if you have a religious faith. You can say that the story that's told in the first few chapters of Genesis, is it 5 chapters? 2 chapters of Genesis, is a metaphorical description of what actually happened. That it's the story that it's a metaphorical story about how we gained a conscience. It's a metaphorical story about why we are separated from God. It gives a series of it's a story about how it is that we have to work for our living. Actually, I'm inclined to think chimpanzees work for their living too, but it's quite possible. You can quite reasonably say that human beings, as they evolved, took on much greater burdens, and that's why probably our brains had to grow so big, because we had a lot of challenges to figure out. And you can see that as a metaphorical story about ejection from Eden. I think I'm more confident, I think, even than Meghan is, that the two are compatible. But you've got to bear in mind here that the kind of religion that I'm thinking about is somebody who's prepared to go quite a long way in seeing the Bible as metaphorical. and not literal. I mean, some of it is literal, but you don't have to take all of it as literal.
Hi. Sorry. I'm Nikki. Okay, so bear with me. I find that the Bible and many other spiritual scriptures are convoluted and filled with conflicting messages. And I think that's part of why our generation is sort of fed up with religion and going towards spirituality without a particular religion. Personally, I believe that religion distracts believers from searching for their own truths and helping others directly rather than praying or sending money to the church. And that if you want to believe in God, if you need that safety blanket as you're moving through life, you can believe in God without relying on Scripture and let the Scripture go. Do you believe that our generation will do this, and do you think it's the right thing to do?
Thanks, Nikki. That's a great question. I mean, I'm super biased on this front because I'm a philosopher. So you tell me a book is really complicated, and the first thing I want to do is like spend a year reading it really slowly and like taking extensive notes. So like the mere fact that something seems complicated or convoluted is not usually like a turnoff for books. But I can understand when people tell me, and people tell me this a lot, that like they sat down and tried to read the Bible and it's just like, you know, you get mired in Leviticus and how to build your tent in the desert and the special fritters that God wants you to make, and you think like, what is the point of all of this? I can totally respect that reaction. I do think, for people who think, you know, the best bet would just be to go for a kind of more general spirituality and stop trying to have that spirituality informed by a text like the Bible. Don't give up too soon, because I do think it's the kind of text, like any complicated philosophical text, it pays dividends for working through it. Part of those are just intellectually, like the Bible is a foundation for a lot of Western thought. So knowing a lot about it and working through that text is going to make you smarter and more able to appreciate how we got to this place that we are and the reasons why we have the beliefs and arguments that currently guide our culture. Spiritually, though, I think like working through it and trying to ask yourself the big questions that the Bible presents this overarching narrative of, which is, you know, Old Testament, where's God? Why has he abandoned us? Why are things going so poorly for us? How do we solve these major political and social problems that are ruining our community? The New Testament, like, you know, we're starting to find an answer to those problems. How do we come together? What exactly do we owe each other? How much money do we need to give to charity? Even sometimes really practical questions. This text tries to offer pretty profound arguments to answer. And I think just, you know, going with a kind of spirituality that's not informed by this background is kind of like realizing that Newton and Leibniz had developed calculus, but deciding you don't really want to like bother with their books and you're just going to like go it alone in solving math problems and try to figure it out as you go. Which is like, it's a way that you can do things and it's respectable, and like not everybody has access to these texts. But if you do have access, like take advantage of it. Like see what you can get from these, and don't like presuppose that that all of the past like historical wrestling with these problems was in vain or is not going to be helpful to you in your search. That said, I think you also get this argument sometimes that's I think also a version of the problem of hiddenness, which is if God exists, and this is the really important text about him, the key text for developing a relationship with him, why did he write it in this crazy, multi-genre, internally inconsistent, big, complicated document rather than something that's more clear? Like, that's a really interesting, powerful objection to the rationality of the Christian faith. The way I start to answer it goes kind of back to what I was saying about the problem of hiddenness. Like, it depends a little bit on what you expect of somebody like God. Like, if you expect him to be the kind of person that writes an IKEA manual to like give us like how to build your soul, you know, these are the tools you should get, don't lift it without a friend. Or if he's the kind of person that like he thinks coming into a relationship with him is also going to involve us coming into relationship with each other and wrestling with these really big questions about what kinds of things we are, you know, then you're going to write something that's more like a Dostoevsky novel, or, you know, give us a text that's more like the kind of thing that we have to struggle with and we have to study in community, where the interpretations are not always super obvious, but if we're lucky, we're guided by a kind of spirit. And that's how I start to answer that question. But again, it's also presupposing some things about the faith already before I even come to my theory of what this book is. Which you might say from the outside, like, you know, I'd read the Bible to believe Christianity in the first place, so you can't like presuppose Christianity when you're telling me why I should read the Bible. And I could kind of understand that as a powerful objection.
So I'm under strict instructions to end this at 8:35. But before we end, if I gave both of you, in a minute or so, what do you think is the sort of the big lesson that, in other words, people here, they're hearing a discussion like this, like what is it people should take from some discussion like this?
Well, I'm not sure, Jim. I do think it's really worthwhile to do a discussion, and I think it's an important part of being young that one should consider these things. It changes the way one sees life, and people who go through their youth without ever having thought of these issues strike me as being at risk of living, the only way I can say it is a less meaningful life, even though I have all these skeptical views about whether life really has any meaning at all. But we feel it has meaning, and perhaps there are regrets they might have later on that they could have forestalled if they had taken the debates about religion seriously.
Yeah, I would say, I regret that for when I was in college, if events like this had happened on my campus, I probably wouldn't have gone, because I just thought, like, these questions are way too personal. They're the kinds of things that I don't really want to have discussions or feel comfortable having discussions openly about. They're the kinds of things that philosophers just really shouldn't debate. It's up to each person to make up their own mind. When in reality, these are exactly the kinds of questions that we can help each other develop better answers to. And that if there's any time in your life when you should be debating and dialoguing about these and trying to figure out what you believe and what your evidence is, being in college at a place like Mount Holyoke, having all of these really smart, sincere people around you, these are exactly the kinds of conversations and debates that you should be having. And I think you have a chance to really serve each other in trying to figure out the answers. So don't think that you have to necessarily go it alone, or that there's reasons to think that debate on these issues is pointless or is not going to be helpful to you, because I think for many cases it really can be.
Thank you both very much. Can you join me in the welcome?
For more information about the Veritas Forum, including additional recordings and a calendar of upcoming events, please visit our website at veritas.org.